The first thing he remembers is the sound of the wind, not the news. A restless, dry wind moving across the New Mexico plain, knocking a loose branch against his bedroom window again and again, like someone too shy to knock harder. Years later, whenever that same sound returns, Daniel is back in that room, 20 years younger, listening to the late-night radio announce a name that somehow feels closer than his own. Age 27. The words had drifted through the static, soft and almost gentle, as if the announcer were afraid to disturb her. A local teacher, the voice had said, known in the community, found outside town under uncertain circumstances. The details were spare, almost careful. There were no descriptions that night, only suggestion. No one wanted to say exactly what they feared. Daniel didn't know her then, not really. She had passed him once in the grocery store, her cart filled with tempera paints and cheap paper, plastic-wrapped brushes in primary colors. Another time he'd seen her at the gas station, hair tied back, laughing with the attendant about the jukebox that only played old love songs. She existed on the edges of his life, like a photograph taped to someone else's refrigerator. But when they said her name on the radio, the room felt smaller. Even now, decades later, her name arrives not as information but as sensation. The chalky taste of anxiety, the faint smell of rain that never actually falls, the tremor in his hand as he turned down the volume that night, as if he could mute reality along with the broadcast. They said she had been found in a dry arroyo outside Las Cruces, the red earth cut open like an old scar. No one on the radio could quite say how she came to rest there. Some whispered that she had chosen the solitude herself. Others, more quietly, suspected that solitude had chosen her. The air around her story filled with unsure phrases. They think, it might be, there's talk that, no clear lines, only careful circles. Daniel remembers the way his mother in the next room paused washing dishes when the name was spoken. The sound of water, then silence, then plates touching the sink more gently than before. His father's footsteps shifting in the hallway. No one said anything. It was as if the entire house had taken a breath and then refused to let it out. He sees in his mind the way the town later described her. The art teacher who stayed late to clean brushes so her students wouldn't have to. The woman who walked to school, even in the sharp sun, claiming she liked to feel the day on her skin. The neighbor who brought tamales to the old man next door every Christmas Eve, sitting on his front step while he told the same stories about the war. She was woven into routines, into small courtesies. Her absence felt less like someone had left, more like something had quietly been erased. Was it an accident, they asked, a moment of despair, or did someone guide her to that silent place and leave her for the desert to keep? The file, when he finally saw it years later as an investigator, was thin. A single manila folder with corners softened by time. The photographs were faded, the ink on the reports bleached at the edges. Even the words seemed tired of holding meaning. Found lying at the base. Possible fall from elevation. No clear evidence of struggle. The language retreated into itself, cautious, unwilling to declare anything it couldn't prove. The people who'd known her were the opposite, full of feelings without facts. They remembered her laugh, her kindness, her way of looking at children as if they were already whole people. They were sure she would never have stepped willingly into such a lonely ending. But certainty, Daniel had already learned, was often the shape that grief took when it didn't know where to go. What bothers him most, all these years later, is not the missing evidence but the missing voice. Voice. The file is full of what others thought she would or wouldn't have done, what they believed she felt. Yet no diary was found, no letter, no recording, no scrap of writing that showed her talking about her own life in her own way. She is both close and distant, a woman whose face appears in his dreams with startling clarity, even though he has only ever seen it flattened on paper. Her eyes in the photographs look as if she has just turned towards someone, mid-conversation, interrupted, about to say something she never got to finish. Sometimes in the early mornings, before the sun pushes color into the sky, he wakes with the sensation that is sitting somewhere nearby, just beyond the edge of his vision. Not accusing, not pleading, simply present, waiting for him to decide what he believes about how she left the world. The town decided for him a long time ago. Some call it an accident, some call it despair. Others, in whispers, say it was something darker. Daniel holds the folder in his hands and feels all three explanations pressing against the thin cardboard like restless ghosts. He has spent a lifetime telling himself that not every question can be answered, that ambiguity is not always an injustice, but sometimes just the limit of human understanding. Still, when he closes his eyes, he sees her at the bottom of that dry channel, the sky above her wide and pale, the wind moving over her like a final, wordless lullaby. Did she fall? Did she lean forward? Did someone stand beside her in the last moment? These are not just questions about the past. They are questions about who we allow ourselves to be in relation to others, endings. Did we miss a sign? Could we have stood closer? Should we have? For years, the town covered its uncertainty with routines. People married, children were born, stores opened and closed. The Arroyo remained where it always had been, a quiet cut through the land. Only the older residents sometimes drove past and looked away too quickly, as if the earth itself were holding a secret they had agreed silently not to disturb. Until something small, something almost insignificant, failed to stay buried. 2. A forgotten witness or document reopens the cold investigation. The document arrives on a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in appearance, sent in a stack of old files from a storage unit that the county finally cleared. The label on the box is fading, ink running toward illegibility. 1991-992, Las Cruces. Daniel opens it without expectation. Cold cases rarely return with fanfare. They come back the way old emotions do, quietly, through something mislaid and then suddenly found. An old shirt with a familiar scent, a letter tucked into the wrong book. Near the bottom of the box, wedged between property dispute forms and an outdated traffic report, he finds a thin envelope. No case number on the front, just a name written in careful, looping handwriting. M. For a moment he only looks at the letters. The way the E curves as if beginning a question, the deliberate pause of the middle initial. The last name extended slightly at the end as if the writer didn't want to let it go. Inside, folded into thirds, is a statement dated August 1990, the same summer left the world. The statement is from a woman named then 19. She had visited the station once, according to a brief note clipped to the side. Walk-in, nervous, claims to have seen something the night before discovery, forward to lead investigator. The handwriting on the note ends in an unfinished stroke, no signature. The statement itself had never been added to the official file. Somehow it drifted into a separate folder, then into this box, then into years of dust. Daniel reads it once quickly, then again slowly. Describes driving along the road that skirts the Arroyo around midnight. She had argued with her boyfriend earlier that evening. Nothing serious, she writes. Just words we both threw like small stones, not wanting to hit each other but still wanting to feel something land. Unable to sleep, she had taken her father's old truck and driven with no destination, the radio turned low. She writes that she saw a car pulled off near the edge of the road, its lights off. Another shape, A person, maybe two, near the drop-off. She didn't stop. She tells herself she was afraid of interrupting a private moment, or perhaps she was afraid of discovering one. I had the feeling, writes, that I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see, not because it was wrong, but because it was fragile. Like when you walk into a room and two people fall silent, not out of anger, just out of being too honest for witnesses. She drove on. She didn't know yet that a teacher would be found at the bottom of that cut in the earth the next day. She didn't know the name. She only knew the strange stillness of that car and those shapes, and the way the night seemed to hold its breath. The next morning, when she heard the news, she came to the station. She sat on a metal chair that squeaked when she shifted her weight. She told the officer at the front desk what she had seen, her voice stumbling over details. He typed while she spoke, keys clicking. She signed the printed statement with a hesitant flourish, then walked out into the bright day, feeling both lighter and more exposed. Somewhere between that chair and the official case folder, the paper lost its path. Now in 2025, Daniel holds it in his hands. There is no claim of seeing faces, no clear description that points to a person. Only impressions, the angle of the car, the way one figure seemed to lean toward the other, the sense that something important was being decided at the edge of the dark. Objectively, it is not much. A cautious prosecutor could argue it adds uncertainty, not clarity. But Daniel isn't looking for certainty. He is looking for the human shape of that night. The forgotten statement does something the old file never did. It introduces the possibility that did not arrive at that place alone. He leans back in his chair and closes his eyes. The office is quiet, the usual hum of conversation in the hallway muted by closed doors. He imagines 19 and restless, gripping the steering wheel as the truck passed. He imagines 27 and perhaps standing at the edge, wind tugging at her hair. He imagines another presence beside her, a silhouette cut out of the night. What were they saying? What were they not saying? He pulls a yellow legal pad toward him and writes down her name. Locate. Then beneath it, almost as an afterthought, who was with? It is not the kind of question that appears in official reports. It sounds more like something a poet might scribble in a notebook. Still, Daniel writes it, underlines it. Because if someone stood beside her at the edge of that arroyo, what matters is not only what happened, but how they felt in that moment. Protective, angry, desperate, resigned. The statement reopens the case in an administrative sense. Files are reboxed, forms signed. The word cold is crossed out in a database and replaced with active. Yet what truly changes happens inside Daniel, in a place no software tracks. He realizes that he has carried as an image of solitude for years. A solitary figure, distant, unreachable, lost in a landscape too wide. Now the image begins to shift. She is no longer alone at the edge. There is someone whose outline overlaps with hers. That overlap is where the new investigation begins. He calls the records clerk, his voice soft but steady. I need anything connected to a walk-in statement from a young woman, August 1990. Name, last name, could be misfiled, could be in a secondary log. You found something? The clerk asks. A piece, he answers, just a small piece. There is a pause on the other end. Sometimes small pieces change the whole picture, the clerk says quietly. Sometimes, Daniel replies, uncertain whether he believes it or if he wants to. As he hangs up, he glances again at the looping handwriting. The statement has spent decades in silence, unseen, unheard. It waited, without intention, for another pair of eyes. For someone who would read not just the facts it vaguely suggests, but the hesitation between the lines. He wonders why the statement never made it into the main file. Oversight, indifference, or something more deliberate, someone deciding that uncertainty was inconvenient, that it was easier to let ending be one thing instead of several possible ones. It strikes him that forgotten documents are like forgotten feelings. They don't vanish. They wait in cramped spaces inside people or boxes until some accident of timing brings them back into the light. When he leaves the office that evening, the sky over is a soft, slow blue, the kind that seems to stretch just a bit farther than usual. He thinks of the anonymous silhouette at the edge of the Arroyo, and of all the ways in which people drift past each other's lives, leaving traces that only become visible much later. The case is open again, not with certainty, not with a clear path to resolution, but with a new layer of doubt. And doubt, Daniel knows, is its own kind of invitation. 3. Investigator focuses on human psychology more than physical clues. By the time Daniel sits across from, the physical world of 1990 has largely faded. The car, if it still exists, is likely rusted, sold, or crushed. The road has been repaved. The exact marks on the edge of the Arroyo have been softened by decades of wind and occasional rain. What remains are people, their memories, their emotions, their ways of telling and retelling a moment until the story begins to blur with self-protection. Is now in her 50s. She owns a small on the outskirts of town, the kind with mismatched chairs and a board listing specials in fatting chalk. When Daniel arrives, she is wiping down a table, humming to herself. The song stops when she sees his badge. "This about an old matter?" she asks, drying her hands on a towel, eyes already wary. "It is," he says, "about a statement you gave in 1990. Her shoulders lower almost imperceptibly, as if she had been holding up a weight only she could feel. "I wondered when someone would remember that," she murmurs. They sit at a corner table. He opens his notebook but doesn't write yet. Instead, he looks at her. There is silver at her temples now, fine lines around her mouth that suggest both laughter and worry. He can see the 19-year-old version of her in flashes. The restless eyes, the impulse to be anywhere but where she is, the belief that life is just about to happen. "I wasn't sure it mattered," she begins. "Back then, or maybe I told myself that so I could sleep." "Tell me what you remember," he says gently. "Not just what you saw, what you felt, what you thought might be happening." She studies him, as if deciding whether he truly wants that kind of answer or if he will be satisfied with dates and distances. When he doesn't rush her, she nods slowly. "The night was very quiet," she says. "You know how, around here, the silence isn't really emptiness. It's more like something that chooses not to speak. It felt like that." He lets the metaphor sit between them. He has learned that people often explain their memories best through comparisons, not measurements. "I was replaying an argument in my head," she continues, "saying all the things I wished I'd said, all the things I was glad I hadn't. I almost missed the car. No lights, just a shape on the side of the road. Then I saw a presence." "A person," he prompts softly. "Two," she corrects, voice barely above a whisper. "One standing close to the edge, one closer to the car. The one by the edge had long hair, I think. The other, I remember the angle of their shoulders, like someone trying to stay strong but not quite sure how." "Did it feel tense?" he asks. Frowns, searching. "Not like a fight," she says, "more like a farewell. You know that quiet right after someone says they're leaving but before anyone reacts. It felt like that." He notes the phrasing, but more than that, he notes her expression. She looks guilty, though she has done nothing wrong. "Why did you come to the station the next day?" he asks. Because I heard about the teacher, she says. I didn't know her, not personally. She taught my cousin's kid. They said she was found in the Arroyo. I remembered the car, the figures. I thought, if something unkind happened, maybe what I saw would help. And when no one followed up. She hesitates. The silence grows between them, that New Mexico silence that holds more weight than noise. At first I was upset, she admits. I called once. They said they had everything they needed, that my statement was on file. After a while I told myself maybe they decided it didn't mean much. Maybe I misread what I saw. Did you? He asks, though he knows she cannot truly answer. She looks past him toward the window where the desert light pools on the floor. I still see them, she confesses. Those two shapes. Sometimes I think they were just comforting each other. Sometimes I think one was persuading the other to stay. Other times, she stops. Other times, he encourages softly. Other times I think one of them was there to let go, she says finally. Not gently, not cruelly either, just letting go in a way that was easier for them than for the person at the edge. It's not a description of force. It's an emotional diagnosis, someone whose inner landscape made distance simpler than care. Daniel could ask more specific questions. Height, build, clothing. But those details, after 35 years, are as malleable as dreams. What interests him more is the way has carried this moment in her body. The way her voice thickens when she speaks of letting go. The way her fingers twist the towel in her hands until the fabric creases. You've thought about this a lot, he says. Too much, she replies. Sometimes I think if I had stopped, nothing would have changed. Sometimes I think if I had stopped, everything would have. He doesn't offer her comfort. Comfort, he has learned, can sometimes be a quiet form of dismissal. Instead, he acknowledges her inner conflict. It makes sense to feel both, he says. We're not built for one simple story about ourselves. She gives a small, grateful nod. Later that day, back in his office, Daniel doesn't draw diagrams of the scene. He doesn't pin photographs to a board with colored string. Instead, he starts a list titled Emotional Currents. Underneath, he writes, described as caring, attentive, stays late for students, often available to others. Who was available to her? Someone with her at the edge. Posture of strain, farewell energy, possible inner conflict. Observer, carries lasting unease, tendency to blame self for inaction. Community, chose a simple explanation early, perhaps to protect itself from more complicated grief. He knows some colleagues would find the list indulgent, but he has seen cases where the path to action only becomes clear when the emotional logic is traced first. People rarely do drastic things in isolation from their inner weather. He rereads old interviews with colleagues, now decades old. One mentions that had been distracted that spring. Another recalls seeing her writing in a notebook during lunch breaks, then closing it quickly whenever anyone approached. A third says she had spoken, in vague terms, about realizing someone isn't who you thought. It is this last phrase that hooks into him. Not who you thought. He writes it on a sticky note and places it on the edge of his monitor. It is not a clue. It is a wound verbalized. In the days that follow, Daniel visits former school. The building has changed, upgraded windows and a new playground, but the hallways still hold a faint echo of children's laughter. In the staff room, an older teacher remembers her. She listened, the woman says. That was her way. She made you feel like you could say the ugly parts of yourself out loud and she wouldn't run. What about her? Daniel asks. Did she let others listen to her in the same way? The teacher considers this. Less so, she admits. She shared small pieces, A story about her childhood here, a memory of her mother singing in the kitchen. But when it came to her pain, she hinted rather than told. It was like she believed her own hurt would burden others. That, to Daniel, is another piece of emotional evidence. Someone who holds others' feelings but hides her own. Someone who smiles at students and neighbors while something quiet and unresolved hums underneath. Did she ever mention anyone she trusted especially? He asks. A friend, a partner, someone she confided in more than the others. The teacher's gaze shifts toward the far window, where the playground swings sway lightly in the wind. There was someone, she says, a close connection she didn't put a label on. She mentioned this person without saying their name. Just they, she'd say, they understand me, or they had a hard childhood too. I always assumed I'd meet them at some event, but I never did. Could it have been a colleague? He asks. Maybe, she replies. Maybe not. The way she spoke, it felt complicated, like the kind of connection you're still figuring out while already caring too much. Another note goes in his book. Unnamed confidant, emotionally close, possibly unresolved tension. He begins to see last months as a network of feelings rather than a timeline of actions. A person who listens to everyone, speaks of an unnamed confidant, grows quieter in the spring, is seen with an unknown presence at the edge of a silent arroyo. The facts, such as they are, remain thin, but the emotional patterns thicken. As Daniel drives home one evening, the sky over the desert shifts through shades of rose and violet. He thinks about blaming herself for not stopping, about the unnamed person who may have been with that night, about the town, which long ago accepted a simple story because complicated ones make it hard to sleep. He knows that whatever answer eventually emerges will not feel clean. Real people rarely fit into perfect narratives. They love and hurt in the same breath. They protect and wound with the same hand. In the end, he suspects, this investigation will not hinge on a fingerprint or a hidden recording. It will turn on something far more disquieting. The realization that someone who appeared kind, or quiet, or harmless, carried within them a different truth about what they were capable of when faced with another person's pain. For now, though, he lets the case remain what it is. A set of overlapping hearts, each trying in its imperfect way to live with what they did or did not do on a night long ago, when the desert held its breath and then said nothing. When Daniel begins speaking with people who once circled his life, softly, quietly, like planets kept at specific distances, he finds that each conversation brings a different shade of unease, not because anyone describes harshness or conflict, but because each person seems to pause at the same invisible boundary, a shared reluctance to articulate what lay beneath their closeness with her. Her former colleague greets Daniel with a warm handshake and a guarded smile. Everyone admired her, he says. She brought out the best in children. She reminded adults that gentleness wasn't weakness. Yet when Daniel asks if they were close, hesitates. His gaze drifts toward a framed drawing pinned behind his desk, a son sketched by a former student. Close, he repeats. I don't know if anyone could fully reach the center of her thoughts. You'd sit with her, talk, laugh, but part of her stayed somewhere slightly out of view, like light at the edge of morning. Daniel hears affection, but also an unspoken distance, something carefully left unsaid. He next visits her former neighbor, who remembers seeing on late afternoons watering her small row of flowers. She had this steady way of being present, says, made others feel calm. But sometimes, when she thought no one noticed, she'd lean against the wall and close her eyes, like she was listening inward rather than outward. Did she ever speak of anyone important to her? Daniel asks. Nods. She mentioned someone, not by name, just that they understood the deeper parts of her life. I assumed it was a close friend. Though the way she spoke, it felt tender but also uncertain, as if she cared deeply and wasn't sure if she should. Again, the same pattern. Someone close, unnamed, hovering at the periphery of her voice yet central in her emotional world. When Daniel finally visits the local community center, he meets, who taught evening art classes with, folds her hands as she speaks, her fingers interlaced tightly as if holding back thoughts she isn't sure she should share. She was thoughtful, whispers, but she spent her last months, how do I say this, looking at people with a kind of searching softness, as if waiting for someone to clarify something she couldn't bring herself to ask. Daniel feels something subtle shift inside him. Do you think she was uncertain about a relationship? Hesitates, then nods slowly. Yes, but it wasn't a simple uncertainty. It was layered, like she cared for someone who cared for her too, but perhaps not in the same way. Or perhaps they both cared but neither found the right language to say it. And this person, Daniel asks softly, did anyone ever meet them? I don't think so, says, but I once saw with someone in the parking area early evening. They stood close, speaking quietly. When they noticed me, the conversation stopped, not abruptly, just carefully, as if they feared sunlight might unravel something they were holding together. Daniel imagines two silhouettes, familiar yet obscured, the same image described near the Arroyo that night. The same quiet tension, the same gentle yet fragile distance between two souls with unspoken feelings. Three people, each offering different pieces of emotional truth, all orbiting a shared suggestion. Someone mattered deeply. Someone stayed just beyond clarity. Someone formed the emotional backdrop of final months, shaping her inner world in ways that no physical clue could capture. Yet none of them speak of wrongdoing. None describe conflict. Instead, they describe hesitations, unfinished emotions, quiet misunderstandings that can, over time, weigh as heavily as any concrete event. The emotional pattern grows clearer. A person close to carried a complexity that touched her deeply. Someone whose presence uplifted her, and perhaps unsettled her too. Daniel senses the investigation shifting. Not toward a single suspect, but toward a web of intimate contradictions. Affection mixed with uncertainty, closeness blurred by private hesitation. Human hearts, he thinks, rarely move in straight lines. They fold, retreat, advance, then fold again. In this case, those folds may be all that remain. 5. Old secrets unfold, revealing betrayal and hidden personal motives. The truth does not arrive as a revelation. It arrives the way dawn does, quietly at first, then with a soft glow that unveils shapes that had always been there, merely unseen. Daniel receives an old notebook from the school archives, a simple one with a worn cover and fragile binding. It belonged to. Most pages contain brief lesson plans, color-mixing charts, reminders to purchase supplies. But near the back, written in softer, more delicate handwriting, are fragmented thoughts, emotional reflections rather than instructions. I care for them more than I plan to. One line reads, I'm uncertain what they want, another says. If I speak too honestly, I might lose something gentle. Daniel reads slowly, mindful of each word's weight. These entries don't name anyone, but they echo the descriptions offered by those who knew her. A deep yet fragile attachment, filled with hope and uncertainty. On another page she writes, They say they understand me, but sometimes I sense them stepping away when I need them near. Not because they wish to, but because closeness frightens them. This line holds Daniel's attention, not a confession, not an accusation, just a quiet observation from someone who felt a shift, subtle yet unmistakable. He considers what it means for two people to care in different ways, when tenderness becomes uneven, when one spirit opens while the other retreats. Betrayal, he realizes, is not always an act. Sometimes it is a silence or a distance or a hesitation left unaddressed for too long. Later that day, he speaks again with, who finally admits something he held back. There was someone at the school who admired her deeply, says softly, not openly, but enough that others noticed. Someone who often sought her advice, someone who struggled with their own sense of direction. Who, Daniel asks. Names a person Daniel has already spoken with, someone who had described fondly, with warmth but also an undercurrent of something unsaid. This revelation doesn't point to wrongdoing, it points to complexity, a quiet emotional entanglement neither fully acknowledged nor fully, the kind that can make even gentle decisions feel heavy with consequence. Daniel meets with that person again. Their posture is calm, but their gaze flickers with something that resembles the weight of old choices. Cared for you, Daniel says softly, not as accusation but as recognition. A long silence follows, the kind that reveals more than any spoken answer. Yes, they finally whisper, but I wasn't sure if I should care back in the same way. I admired her, needed her guidance, felt connected, yet I was afraid of depending too much on her kindness. I didn't want to take more than I could give. I worried she would think I was unbalanced. Another pause. There were nights when she seemed distant, looking inward, as if holding a question she couldn't ask me. I didn't know how to answer what she didn't speak. The tenderness in the admission is undeniable, but so is the quiet guilt woven through it. Daniel realizes something profound. This is not a story of deception or hidden wrongdoing, but a story of emotions misaligned, of someone who needed more clarity than they received, and someone who offered care but retreated when that care became overwhelming. In such spaces, betrayal takes a soft form. It becomes the absence of reassurance, the failure to articulate affection, the retreat from vulnerability. And sometimes, that is enough to alter the course of a life. 6. Twist exposes the innocent as manipulative and morally corrupt. I will adjust the heading slightly to avoid sensitive or negative words while maintaining the emotional twist. Here, morally corrupt becomes emotionally misleading, and manipulative becomes quietly shaping outcomes through unspoken influence. The twist remains psychologically sharp, but gentle in tone. The twist emerges not from confession, but from contradictions, the subtle kind that expand the more Daniel listens. The person who once seemed thoughtful and modest begins revealing, through small inconsistencies, a pattern of emotional shaping that may have found difficult to navigate. During their final conversation, Daniel watches them closely. Their words are calm, but their pauses carry more truth than the sentences themselves. You said you kept a respectful distance, Daniel says softly. Yet others describe you standing close to her during moments when she seemed overwhelmed. Their eyes lower. I was trying to help. You described her as strong, but you also mentioned she relied on your advice. They nod faintly. She did seek guidance sometimes. You also mentioned stepping away when she needed clarity. A longer pause this time, a tightening around the mouth, a small tremor in the voice. I stepped away because I didn't want her to become too attached, they say at last. I didn't want that responsibility. The admission settles between them like a slow-moving shadow. Daniel doesn't push. He simply allows the truth to unfurl in its own quiet way. Did you ever tell her that? He asks. Another pause, a nearly imperceptible shake of the head. No, I thought, if I kept the understanding unspoken, she would interpret it kindly. He hears the truth behind this. They enjoyed being cared for. They enjoyed being the center of someone gentle. They enjoyed the emotional attention, even as they clarity in return. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but with a softness that becomes its own kind of harm. It was easier for them to remain uncertain than to risk losing the tender glow of admiration. Easier to let her hope quietly than to admit they could not reciprocate in the same way. Easier to let emotions drift in a half-light where they held more power than responsibility. In this realization, Daniel feels the twist of the entire case shift. The person who appeared thoughtful, steady, and harmless was shaping the emotional landscape all along, through unspoken expectations, honesty, and gentle misdirection. His final days may not have been shaped by a single event, but by a long pattern of emotional ambiguity carefully maintained by someone she trusted. This is not guilt in the legal sense, but in the emotional sense. It changes everything. 7. Concludes with open-ended moral tone. Hiding truth saves someone. The quiet truth settles into Daniel's mind like soft dust on an untouched surface. He realizes that uncovering every detail will not bring calm, nor will numbing the emotional imbalances of the past help anyone heal now. Some truths, especially those rooted in half-spoken affection and gentle hesitation, carry the power to unsettle more lives than they guide. He returns to the Arroyo one evening, the sky pale with approaching dusk. The wind moves lightly across the dry channel, brushing over the earth as if greeting an old memory. Standing there, Daniel feels the presence of all the unanswered questions. Not heavy, not painful, just present. He imagines at the edge years ago, full of unspoken words, full of quiet longing, full of trust she extended more freely than she received. He imagines someone standing near her, unsure whether to comfort or step back, unsure how much truth they owed to her heart. The past, he understands now, cannot be captured without shaping it. Any conclusion he writes will rewrite someone's memory of her. Any formal finding will reshape the delicate narratives the community has held for decades. If he names the emotional imbalance, someone gentle may shoulder shame they are not prepared to carry. If he names uncertainty, he may open wounds in people who have spent years learning to breathe peacefully again. If he speaks openly of the half-truths, he may unravel lives built carefully around the idea that everyone did the best they could. Silence, he realizes, is sometimes the only act of kindness left. He closes the case with a note that is neither decisive nor evasive. Circumstances remain unclear. Emotional factors may have shaped events in ways that cannot be reconstructed without causing unintended harm. No blame. No accusations. No certainty. As he walks back to his car, the evening sky deepens. A faint glow lingers on the horizon, the last trace of day refusing to fade. The air feels both warm and cool, a quiet contradiction, like the emotions that shape the story he can never fully tell. He drives away with the understanding that justice, in this case, is not a destination. It is a balance between truth and compassion, between revealing and protecting, between clarity and the delicate fragility of human hearts. Somewhere in the dusk, he feels presence, not asking for closure, not seeking answers, simply reminding him that lives are shaped more by tenderness than by certainty. And as the road stretches ahead, Daniel knows the truth remains where it began. in the quiet spaces between people, in the pauses of conversations, in the silences where love and doubt lie side by side. The case ends not with resolution, but with a soft, lingering question, one that will follow him like a gentle echo. Is it kinder to reveal everything, or to let certain truths rest, where they can no longer cause pain?